of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can you call the roll?
Steve Nelson.
Here.
James Shiloh.
Here.
Louise Lee. Here. Michael DeVito.
Here.
Eric Jones.
Present.
Kristen Wren. Here. Quorum is present.
Thank you very much. I have a motion. Do we have any changes to the agenda? If not, do we have a motion to adopt the agenda as presented? Second. Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Do I have a motion on the NIA consent agenda?
Move to approve the NIA consent agenda. Second.
Motion and seconded. Roll call, please.
Shiloh.
Yes.
Davey.
Yes.
DeVito.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
Wren.
Yes.
Nelson.
Yes.
Motion
And I
carries.
skipped over our consent agenda, sorry. Do I have a motion for our consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call.
Wren.
Yes.
Shiloh.
Yes.
Davey.
Yes.
DeVito.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
Nelson.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Awards, Spartan Awards. Who's taking that?
Mr. Brennan's gonna
Uh-huh.
take that.
All right. Well, thank you guys all for coming. My name is Mr. Drennan, athletic coordinator and dean of students here at the middle school. Tonight, we're very excited to honor the dance team who just keeps winning MCJC year after year after year. So they're old pros at this, but I'd like to introduce their coach, Annie Bucaro, to give them their medals and introduce the ladies. So girls, once you get called up, we'll kind of come around and get our medals over here. Does that work for you guys? Right over here? Okay, perfect.
Harper. Her mom's crazy. Ava. Skinny Bowie. Taylor. Ashlyn. Mackenzie. Finley. Nora. Brooklyn. Claire. Daniela. Lily. Marin.
All right, so I think our 8th grade girls, somebody help me out, 8th grade ladies, how many in a row is this for you? 7 in a row for these ladies, so they are dominating in their field, so pretty awesome. Let's give one more round of applause.
You gonna get in there, Michael?
Yeah.
Dance here.
Good year.
So good, sit down.
Huh? Yeah.
Congratulations.
I mean, I have no. You brought it up.
Way to go, coach.
All right. Yeah. We're all gonna go.
Yeah.
You don't want to see? So next is communications, correspondence, and informational items, newsletters and correspondence. Several legislative reports you might know.
Just say, there were a lot.
I skipped quite two things, yeah, sorry about that. Before I go to that, audience participation, is there anybody in the audience that'd like to speak to the board at this time? Seeing none? Nobody? We'll go back to communications. There are quite a few legislative reports, so there are a ton of bills that are going to come out. I'm tracking any of that. Scary.
I would strongly encourage the board to keep an eye on the IASB updates that come through the legislative updates. I would expect it to be another busy session, and we do a good job of keeping you informed. IASB keeps superintendents informed, and expect a lot of activity this spring.
Absolutely. FOIA requests, if there were any. Suspension report. Comments?
Getting a little busy.
Yeah. So, just for the sake of discussion, how are we sitting as far as like restorative justice and actual consequences versus sending them right back to class, and that balance between when to do that, when not to do that, at both buildings?
Yeah, there's a little bit of judgment that goes into that, but I think restorative practices is something that we've seen implemented across the district. I've had several conversations with Mr. Drennan about how it's implemented here at the middle school. I know it's implemented at the high school. There's a balance between when the students need to continue to be out of the class, so they're not a safety hazard, they're not a distraction from what's going on in the classroom, but as much as possible, trying to have a restorative conversation with them to kind of remedy whatever the issue may be. Ideally, to get back in class as soon as it's appropriate, so they're not disrupting. They're not a safety or security issue with other students. But there's a little bit of judgment that goes into that when they end up in the office, and whether it's the principal or the dean of the assistant principal.
But if they're like a habitual or repeat offender type, how are we dealing with that?
I would say those are probably in a kind of a case-by-case basis, depends what the behavior is, if it's the same repeated behavior. In some cases, we're seeing different behavior, but it's disruptive nonetheless. So we start with the restorative practice, and any admins in the audience, if I'm getting this wrong, you need to jump in and make sure I get this right. Typically, we would start with the restorative conversation, and then it progresses as needed. So as it becomes more of a disruption, they're going to stay in the office longer, and consequences will ramp up as their behavior continues. Try to involve parents as much as we can. I'd like to say that all parents are receptive to that. Unfortunately, just not the case. But we try to involve them when necessary and keep them in the loop. So obviously the shorter they're out of class, the better, but it's got to be not a disruption, not a safety issue, and it progresses as the behavior continues. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I mean, just knowing we're going into spring and spring break coming up, it always ramps up this time of year. So I know it's going to be tough around teachers and things like that. So
Yeah, so just this one seems busier than
feels a little
past reports or anything.
easier.
So I was gonna say too, I was just looking in like 2019, we were at like number 19 the same time. 2022, it was at like, we were at number 25 for infractions. Now we're at like 32, so it seems, I mean, my guess is like, it's coming out of COVID, but I don't know.
I would say it's two things, and again, jump in if I'm missing anything. I would say it's two things. First of all, it's time of year. This is about time of year. We're ways away from Christmas break. We're not quite to spring break. The weather's not warm yet. But the other issue is that we're seeing a lot of that escalated behavior over the past couple of years. I think part of that's a result of COVID. My personal opinion, for what it's worth, is that I think we're continuing to see some societal changes, and that's impacting behavior and student choices. But we're definitely seeing escalation in student behavior, and we're seeing that in younger grades than we've ever seen it before. Pre-K, K, first grade, the kind of behavior that I wasn't used to seeing in the middle school when I was a teacher and a building administrator. So I think it's both of those things. So Michael, I think you're right.
Easy to see that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Committee reports? Anybody have committee reports? If not, I do. We had an SCF meeting last night. It was a grant meeting. We had 12 grants that were submitted. A few that kind of came late under the wire, but we took them in and awarded 11 of 12 completely full, all full. And we still have money left for the April grant cycle, which is not always the case. Sometimes we kind of run out of money before we get to April, depending on what the asks are. And they were a broad spectrum from books to furniture to softball field. So there were a number of things in there. Even iPads here at the middle school for art as a kind of a pilot program. So it was a good meeting, one of our longer ones, but it was a good meeting. And the trivia night the Friday before was quite a success. Filled the place up. 120-ish people. They had to cut off registrations. There was no more room. And I think as of last night, all the numbers aren't completely tallied and everything, but net after costs, which were minimal, were probably over $5,000 raised. So it's now become not a small event, but a little bit bigger event. So that helps. And we also did receive an additional $10,000 for Kendall.
Yes.
Yes, when she passed, there was another 10,000 we just bumped into. So that was put to use last night. So no planning and zoning meeting until a couple of weeks yet. So that's all I have.
We did have a sustainability committee meeting. There's been kind of some work getting that committee going again after the COVID hiatus. And I guess it really started, I think, as a parent-led effort more so, right, Nicole? And is now kind of being transitioned to a little bit more formal organization with some school district administrators as well. So we spent some time just kind of recapping some roles and responsibilities. One of the projects they're looking at right now is adding some no idling signs, so trying to reduce the impact of the school district and parents on the environment, because that's of course their mission. So starting at least at the middle school, where parents tend, I know at least by our elementary school, parents will get there 45 minutes early and you'll see the exhaust running while they're keeping themselves warm and whatnot. So just trying to remind them that if you're going to park there for a while waiting for your kids to try and turn off the engine. So they're going to start that there. What else did we talk about?
Birthday is coming up.
Yeah, birthday's coming up, so looking at some events to coordinate with that. We had previously tried to sponsor, I think, planting trees with the park district, but the park district doesn't sound like is going to be able to support that effort. So we're looking to work with Mark Ekstrom on some trees that need to be replaced at Sycamore anyway, and see if we're able to do that. But I guess vandalism has been a problem in the past with little saplings getting ripped out of the ground, so trying to maybe plant some bigger trees that might discourage that sort of behavior. And then there's continued work just looking at things like waste in the lunchroom, and what can we do about sharing tables. I think was an effort that group did. So if kids had food that they didn't want, at least it was going somewhere where some other person could use it as opposed to getting tossed in the trash. So I'll keep you apprised of anything else.
Did anybody ask any questions on our little foray into solar panels a while back?
I think there was a brief discussion about what we looked into it.
We brought it up as a topic just to let them know that we were exploring it. And so they were excited about those possibilities.
Thank you. Anybody else? Report? If not, Assistant Superintendent for Business Services report.
I
Hi, this is what you've all been waiting for. It's that unique time of the year where we're kind of talking about 3 fiscal years all at once, so it's a little later than usual. We're wrapping up fiscal year 22, and then we're about 6 months into 23, and then we're already starting to talk about 24 here coming up. So, but tonight, just as a formality, the board does formally have to approve the audit, and I know you've all read 156 pages of this, Catherine, so there'll be a quiz later. But this is still in draft form. There's just some things that we're tightening up, but it's pretty much ready to go. So just to recap kind of numbers and just kind of get right to it. So when we look at our operating budget, which would be our ed fund, O&M, transportation, retirement, and our working cash funds. So just looking at those funds alone, our operating budget, we had about $310,000 of a surplus budgeted. Actuals came in about $26,000, so we were still balanced with those operating funds. Overall, we were balanced also, but we really like to look at those operating funds specifically. The big factor in the difference in these is when I presented this in September of 21. We were still negotiating with our teachers at that time, and we didn't finish that up until January. So we knew that those numbers were going to come in a little bit differently. And so actually, I think those actuals came in pretty darn close to where we had projected it to be once we finished those negotiations. So I was quite pleased with where it came into. We know that's a goal of ours, is to be balanced every year, so we were able to accomplish that. But other than that, unless you have specific questions on expenditures and revenues, that's kind of the bottom line, and that's where we ended up. So kind of to piggyback off of that, just talked about the audit in general. So we always have to complete an annual financial report. That's required of ISB, our ROE, our local regional office of education. Those have to be uploaded to them. That's just as simple as, not simple, but an Excel spreadsheet that has to be done. Our district, because we do apply for the Certificate of Excellence through ASBO International, and because of the filing disclosures that we need to do through the SEC, we do need to do this comprehensive annual financial report. So that's something actually that not every school district does or has to do. So that's why we're still completing this large booklet right now. And we have talked in the past, I know Eric has brought this up numerous times about looking at doing a request for proposal or an RFP for audit services. We've been with our current auditors for a long, long time, for as back as I can go. They started off as a smaller mom and pop kind of audit firm. They've since sold and been bought out to Whitley, which is a larger corporation. So some of their processes have changed, and just having that corporate, outlook on things. But they have the same staff that we've been working with for a long time, which is great because we have that autonomy between those individuals. We do know last year I was able to share kind of what we're paying for those services, and we actually paid the lowest amount in the surrounding area. But it's not always about, the money piece of it, and just making sure we're getting the best bang for our buck. So we did do a request for proposal. It was quite a lengthy one. It was about 25 pages long. But I'm glad we did it because we were able to send that out to about a group of 10 different CPA firms and ask them to go ahead and submit a proposal. So we're looking at doing audit services for fiscal years ending 23, 24, and 25, so a 3-year contract. And then with the option to renew for 26 and 27, depending on what those numbers come in at. So they would provide our AFR, our CAFR, and then we also have to do a single audit. That's required by the federal government because of the federal revenues that we receive, specifically for our special education grants. It's over a certain amount of threshold of dollars. So like I said, we invited 10 firms to submit a proposal. As of today, we have had 3 decline, which is great because we know they're not going to send anything in. So I am assuming that the other 7 will respond, but that's not necessarily the case. So just timeline-wise, we did send that request out at the beginning of the month. The deadline for submission is this Friday. And then, so next week, we have a committee that will review that proposal. That'll be myself and Steve, and then because we are the fiscal agent for Northwestern Illinois Association, we did the RFP in conjunction with them. So their executive director and then their finance director will sit on that committee also, and we'll review those submissions together. And then if we feel like an interview is necessary with those finalists, or we want to bring them in and just ask them some questions, we'll bring them in that next week. And because we only have one board meeting next month, it's going to be a little tough to bring it to you guys by that March 14th board meeting. So we have an April deadline in there to bring it to you guys for approval.
So will we definitely be changing auditors, or is there a possibility that walking away from this will end up where
Not
we are?
necessarily, yep. Yeah, we could end up with the same audit firm. I guess it just depends on how many people actually submit a proposal, and based on maybe interviewing them, how we feel like we connect with those people. Because I will tell you, I spend a lot of time with them throughout the year.
I bet.
And just for someone to understand our processes and how we operate is, it's a lot to bring new people into that, but sometimes it's necessary, so.
I came away from the last conversation feeling much better about the consistency we'd had with our previous auditors, but I love that you're going through this process. I do thank you for doing that and being so transparent about it.
So that's all I had on that, Steve. And like I said, I would ask for the board to actually approve this audit then.
So, we need a motion to approve the current audit. Anybody want to make a motion?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded, roll call.
Davey,
Yes.
DeVito,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Friend,
Yes.
Shiloh,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
motion carried.
Great. On to the superintendent's report. Nothing big there.
Only one item on the superintendent's report tonight, and it's really a culmination of several months, almost a year, since we really started talking about this process in earnest. Really got going in the fall, several months worth of work in terms of developing the tentative plan, gathering feedback from the community. As you all know, January was a busy month, getting out in the community, gathering feedback, getting out into the schools, talking to staff, gathering feedback, answering questions. The primary goal, once again, was balancing the enrollment at the schools, as well as balancing class sizes. We attempted to achieve some other goals along the way. We weren't able to achieve all of those. Although this isn't really an operational issue, it's not lost on us that there's an emotional impact, and I've talked about that throughout the process. So I've talked to lots of families, parents, whose children are in those boundaries that they're going to move. So we recognize that. At the same time, if I go to my first slide here, after continuing to listen to the last couple of weeks, my recommendation hasn't changed. I still feel like it's the best option for the school district. It will balance the enrollment. I guess want to stress, I haven't talked about this a lot, but the enrollment that I've talked about is still going to fluctuate from time to time, right? Grade levels fluctuate a little bit, and we'll see a little bit of fluctuation between the schools, but based on the homes and the areas that we've looked at, the number of students that are there now, what we expect to see in the future, I feel like this is going to balance us and achieve that goal. The second bullet point really goes to that, doing this process, going through this process every couple of years. And Eric made a comment at the last board meeting that I felt like had a lot of merit. I kind of ambiguously suggested every 3 to 5 years, no, more often than 3, no farther out than 5. 5 is a nice round number, right? But I think Eric's point was a good one. If we do this every 5 years, there's a chance, although I think it's somewhat slim, I think there is a chance that a student may have to switch schools twice. Kindergarten year, and then that 5th grade year. So in order to kind of address that, I'm recommending that the board and the school district go through this process every 6 years. So, doesn't mean the student is gonna change once, but it does avoid the possibility of a student having to change twice, as long as they stay in that residence. Now, if they move from, within the community to the ball game, and we've always handled those for older students, fifth graders, fourth graders, going to be fifth graders especially, we've handled those a little bit different. So I'm recommending it's every 6 years instead of every 5. I'm not gonna go through all of the changes, but this is the map overall. Just to highlight this quickly, stand on the sides of the board and everybody in the audience can see. This entire section currently attends North Grove. Stone Prairie would attend southeast. The area south of the Kishwaukee River would attend west. The area north of the Kishwaukee but south of Mount Hunger would attend north. These two areas, this one currently attends southeast. That would move to west. This area currently attends South Prairie. That would move to west. Edwards becomes the dividing line there. And then this section here, the Woodgate subdivision, this is DeKalb Avenue, Peace Road, that would move to South Prairie. A couple of other things that I included, again, based on the board meeting on February 14th. The next couple of slides have some capacity and some capacity numbers that we talked about at the last meeting. Those capacities you'll see are based on information that we received from our school architects. The numbers included in there are a couple years old, but they include 6-day enrollment. So just wanted to highlight that. This is really valuable information, but you'll see here in a second that there's a lot of fluctuation in those numbers. So while I think it's a really good idea, I thought the point again was really good about using capacities as a target. I think the district needs to be cautious moving forward and using that as a real absolute target. Should it be considered? Absolutely. I think it was a well-made point, but it's got to be a factor taken into account with a lot of other factors as well. So this is the exact same slide that I showed in November of 20, I believe. This is the most recent facility audit done by our architects. The red box is drawn around the capacity calculations. So you can see that there is a capacity calculation done using an ISB, State Board of Education formula. Capacity in terms of designed operational capacity there in the middle, and then the current operational capacity when this study was done. You can see there's a lot of fluctuation. So just looking at North alone at the top, really easy to point out. The calculation based on ISB. ISB's formula is 450. The designed operational capacity is 423. The current operational capacity is 354. It's a couple years old. But you can see how those numbers fluctuate for all 5 of those grade schools. So keeping tabs on where we're at in terms of capacity in all 3 of those calculations, working with our architects. Again, Mark Ekstrom was involved throughout this process. I don't know anybody that knows our facilities better than Mark Ekstrom does. So the benefit of having Mark is that it's not just this calculated capacity. Mark has a really good sense of how the space in the buildings can be used. So this is an updated slide from that same presentation. So at the time we had 2019-20, 2019-2020 school year, 2020-21. I've added 21-22 and 22-23. The 22-23 with the star is the number this year had the boundaries changed this year. So that's that number that was taken from the last presentation. And then I just picked one capacity number and I picked operational. So when it really comes to operating the school district and the schools, that's the capacity number that seemed the most appropriate. And you can see how all of those numbers compare to both the current school year, 6-day enrollment, and then 6-day enrollment had the boundaries changed in this column. So you can still see we're still under that capacity in all of our schools, a little bit more room than in others. Again, that's a calculation not necessarily based on exactly how we use that space in the school. One of the other questions that came up at the last meeting, that's come up at several community meetings and meetings with staff, was resources. So how is the district gonna kind of move resources around based on the changes to the boundaries? One of the conversations we had just last week was on our ELL programs. So we, Mr. Reineck and I and Mr. Rice talked with Cuervo Robles, who's our ELL director for the school district. And based on the recommended boundary changes, what happens with those students? Where would they move from one school to another? So we've already had conversations about how we would shift resources to meet those students' needs. One of the things I referred to last time was that in terms of special education, that's a conversation we have every year. So how are students aging out of programs? How are they moving from elementary to middle school to high school? How do we need to shift our programs and our services? Something we do every year. We'll continue to do that. And because the board is hopefully going to approve the recommendation tonight, we'll have the opportunity to take into account all of the boundary changes this spring for next year. But it's not just ELL and special education, it's all of the services and programs that are provided by the district. So making that decision tonight allows us the next couple of months this spring and over the summer to make changes in any of the programs that we offer within the school district. One of the things that we talked about at the last meeting and I've talked about previously is that resources follow the students. So resources are allocated based on student need. Do we have some holes? We do, because we're short-staffed. Vacancies that have been out there that we don't have applicants for. But in terms of the staff that we have, the resources that we have, they are allocated based on student need, and that will continue to be the case. I didn't go through, the whole presentation all over again. I wanted to hit the highlights, but I'm available for any questions that you may have.
Sir, the other thing that came up at those community meetings is perhaps giving an equitable amount of kids with needs to a particular school based on these boundaries. So not necessarily maybe kids that require special education services or ELL services, but just more of a needy population. Is that something that we try to address through the budget process, through our planning for the fall, that to perhaps give those schools more support, or?
So we do, and one really clear, transparent way that we do that is with some of our Title I funds that are allocated based on some anticipated higher needs that students coming from low-income families typically have, not necessarily always have, but typically have. So some of our schools, West Elementary is one of them, I believe Southeast and South Prairie, if I have that right, also qualify for those funds. And those are funds given to us by the federal government that flow through ISB. But that's an example of how resources are allocated to some schools that other schools don't have based on the need. We use local resources kind of in the same way. Resources follow the need and follow the students. So one of the other conversations we're going to have coming up here real shortly internally in the district is what needs do we have moving forward in terms of staffing, programs. This is the time of year that we get wish lists from principals and directors. My question is always, where's the greatest need, and what resources do we have available to maybe reallocate to support that need? I would love to grant every wish that's brought to us, but I'm also committed to living within our budget. So we gather all of those requests at the district office level, then we have a conversation about what resources are available and how can we allocate those based on the needs of the students. Not necessarily one reading teacher for all 5 schools. And I'm just using that as a hypothetical. If the need is greater at one school, that school may get one and a half. And split teachers in half if they split their time between the schools. So a couple of examples of how we target resources where we feel like there's the greatest need. And that's based on feedback that we get from principals, directors, staff, those sorts of things.
And there seems to be some confusion, at least from community people I spoke to, about whether positions aren't filled because of financial reasons, or if they're not filled because there's no applicants. Is there a way that that can be better communicated or become more transparent so people have a better understanding that
Sure.
we really do want to fill them, but there's no applicants?
Sure. One of the communications that will go out tonight, assuming that the plans is approved, is an internal communication I'll work with our communications department on. Lauren Holtz is here, will help with that. Describing, the plan, what's coming, that's something that we can communicate. Maybe Camden's been great in terms of the Chronicle and reporting progress, maybe that can be included there, but we can get that word out. Positions that aren't filled, it's not budgetary. We don't post positions if we don't have the resources to fill those positions. We post those positions when we have the resources. Positions that are full or vacant right now, or because we don't have applicants for it. There have been a couple of instances where we've had applicants that aren't qualified, clearly not qualified, so we can't consider those, but vacant positions right now are positions that we can fund and fill if we have applicants that apply for them. That's a really good point, yeah.
And we normally have some contingency in the budget too, in case we need 2 or 3 or 4 other positions. Whether we can fill them or not is the other question.
Yeah.
So I had a question, only because I apologize I wasn't able to be here on the 14th, so it might have already been asked, but what was the impact, small or large, with regards to transportation?
Well, our own Lacey Lance, who's Director of Transportation, was also involved in the process from the beginning. So whatever we did had to fit within our transportation program. We're not adding routes. I don't think we're dropping routes either. It's a matter of, reallocating where the routes go and who gets picked up and gets transported.
I didn't know if we'd end up with 3 less or 3 more or what have you.
So it's basically a neutral impact of transportation?
Yeah, most of the places that are impacted are already receiving some form of transportation now, so it would just be the difference of where they're being delivered and picked up from. I mean, we have some routes that are long, so we would like to make them shorter. And so if we have some folks that want to apply this summer, we have some movement there. The resources we have currently will fulfill the need that this is.
We continue to need to have staggered start times, though.
Yes.
But that had nothing to do with the boundary study, all about the bus drivers.
Yeah. We're in a better place than we were. But
That's good.
we're still growing. So.
Steve, a question that's deep in the hypothetical. Going back to, you guys said you had looked at the possibility of doing attendance centers, and collecting, trying to achieve perfect diversification, right, or homogenization, because you've got all the first grade students at one building. It was my understanding from conversations we've had in previous years that the way the Title I funding works, like a school has to hit a certain threshold of students that qualify in order to receive that funding. Would that pose an issue down the road if we went to an attendance center design where now we don't hit that threshold and lose federal funding, potentially?
Yeah, because in order for the school to receive those funds, that school has to reach a certain threshold. So you're right. Would all 5 of our schools, if they're all, first graders at one school and second graders at another school? I don't think so. So it could be impacted by that. Now, I've never worked in a district where there are attendance centers, and I would want to do a little research to see if there are, not necessarily exceptions, but maybe different guidelines. I don't think that there are. So to answer your question, it is deep in the hypothetical. I appreciate you saying that.
Well, I just want to understand, because we're kind of weighing that, how great would it be if we had perfect, representation across the schools, but you also have to balance that there could be a consequence to that
Dixon
from a
does great
district
centers.
resource standpoint.
They're smaller than us, but they do great centers. They have K1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in their elementaries.
Yeah.
Rochelle does.
Yeah, Rochelle moved to it this year. Last year was the first year.
And there's obviously, there's pros and cons to it.
Yeah.
But
It's great educationally. Your first grade teachers in the same school, but now you've got families who have 3 or 4 kids that are all over, and they're moving year to year.
yeah.
So it's pros and cons for sure.
I think at our last meeting when you said, probably unintended consequences, I definitely can see that. It might be great to have all those kids all mixed in the same building, but somebody who loved their neighborhood school, to give that up, I would think there'd be a lot of people that don't like it for that reason. And I'm sure there's other things too. I don't know.
Yeah, I wonder from like a mentorship standpoint, or
Yeah,
you know,
right.
social
Right.
influence of being around older peers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Deeply
it's
out
interesting.
topic for tonight, I guess.
Yeah.
To your transparency question about open positions, I mean, I don't know, is that something where you'd look like on the web page and just have a ticker that says like the number of open positions? Because you have to click through to finally find out that we've got, 40 unfilled, 38, sorry.
Yeah.
But 38 unfilled positions.
Right,
Is
so,
that-
one person that reached out to me and said, can we please fill the position that's open?
Should you apply?
And I actually
Taking applications.
reached out to Steve and said, okay, so just so I answer this right, it's not filled because we can't find anybody, right? It's not a financial thing. And I just think that goes to, obviously, if he's asking it, there's probably other people that are like, well, why don't you fill these positions? It's not for lack of wanting to. We want to, there's just not anybody out there that wants to do the job.
And we can get that word out in kind of a positive,
Right.
we have these open positions,
Right.
the resources are there to fill them. Come work for Sycamore schools, support your children, your neighbor, kids in your neighbor, that sort of, we can put a positive spin on that, but make sure that we, communicate, these are open because we don't have applicants, not because of resources.
And actually, the building principals, at the end of their weekly newsletter, I don't know that that's the right term for it, but the email, there's often a plug in there about applying to work in the school district. But it's more of just a general, and I don't know if people read into that and think, oh, if you're ever looking for a job, you should go work for them. Rather than it's really an issue.
Not just in the schools, but everywhere nationwide. I mean,
Right.
Yeah, put my hand up to that as well. Like, this is not unique to, because that's some of the feedback I hear as well.
Yes.
But it's not unique to here. It's not unique
It's
to
everywhere.
schools. It's everywhere.
Yeah. So I don't want to put you on the spot. I'm not looking for like definite details, but I know this is the first time you've done this boundary study. With almost hindsight, is there something that you would have done differently? Is there something you would have looked at differently from the start, or?
Although I'm making the responsibility is mine to make the recommendation to the board, I do want to put a plug in for all of the people that were part of this process. Whether it was central office admins, Nick, Nicole, Lacey, I mentioned Mark was involved, Lauren Holtz was involved in communications. The district admin team was involved in the process. We got feedback from staff, we got feedback from the community. The plan truly is the sum of all of those conversations. And one of the great things about doing this in kind of a team way is that it wasn't relying upon what I thought. At the end of the day, my responsibility was to be part of a team that took all this information in, kind of filtered through it all, and make a final decision on what I think is the best plan. But I think one of the benefits is that we have all of these voices in the process from almost from the beginning. We did it in a very phased-in process. I do want to credit Lauren Holtz and Communications Department for helping us develop a plan that got the word out. Nick and Nicole got to come with me in all those meetings to meet with staff and the community. There was a real effort to be transparent, to be open, to listen, and in hindsight, there's probably one or two things I may have tweaked along the way, but there's really nothing that comes to me off the top of my head in terms of, man, we really missed X or Y or Z. And frankly, I was expecting that in January when we went out and started to talk about the plan. And there were great questions, great comments and suggestions. But there was never a moment where I thought, oh, gosh, we really missed that. Really didn't feel like we did, and it was because it was a team effort. So, we talked about, kind of systemizing this process a little bit so that 6 years from now, when we do it again, we're not starting from scratch, we're going kind of back to the playbook and starting again. It's gonna look very similar to start with. Circumstances will certainly change between now and then, and whoever's part of that team, I'm gonna encourage them, whether I'm still here or whoever else. Here's the starting point, but make sure that you're taking current circumstances into account when you're working through the process. I think that's gonna be really important. It's a good question.
Chris, building off of your point, and I don't know, it just kind of popped up in my head when you asked that question. I can't help but think, like, I wish we could have done it sooner. And I say that in the sense that we can utilize resources better, we can take a little bit of the burden off of staff, we can empower learners better because we have more. Now hopefully we're reducing class sizes a bit, we're able to utilize what resources we do have. I understand the burdens of COVID, I understand the burdens of the contract, I understand the burdens of changes in terms of positions and staffing, and I'm just like, I know that for me, like coming from the outside looking in, I think you could ask anybody, and like it's been overdue, especially if we're looking at a 6-year thing and we're going, okay, last time we did this was back when North Grove was in place. So I'm just, the number that I come back to is like if you go on the school report card, and it's kind of like 2 steps removed, but I look at like teacher attendance, and so it's the number of absences that a teacher has that are greater than 10 days percentage. Sycamore School District over the last 5 years has always beaten the state in teacher attendance. And this year is the first year we haven't beaten the state, and by like a huge amount. Like it's down to 58% of teachers that have greater than 10 days. So it's just, to me, like that number is shocking that this is the throw-off year. So it's like if we could have caught it sooner, which, woulda, coulda, shoulda, but, COVID put a real big wrench in it. But I'm now hoping, like I'm looking at that number and I'm hoping now as we're talking about, how do you fill these positions? Like that email that you mentioned about, like, when are you gonna fill this position? If now, by moving some of these tiles around, we can utilize the staff that we have better. Maybe it's gonna help build up morale a little more, maybe it's gonna help absenteeism a little bit more, which ultimately leads to, better quality of education for students. So that's, to me, like, again, looking at that, like, I'm asking that same question, and I'm just not wondering, like, is there another way that it could have been done sooner? But I don't see with all the other things that the board had and what the school district and the world was going through that it could have. So, but I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. So.
It was an undertaking. Trying to have done that, looking back and trying to have done that during COVID, if everything else was on our face, last year would have been tough. I don't know that we could have squeezed in any other large project this year at the same time. It really allowed us to focus on and I think do a good job. But redistricting, conducting this boundary study, was one of the first things I heard when I got here. This really needs to be looked at. So I'm glad we finally got to it. And I'm glad that if it's approved, the plan is going to be to do this every 6 years on a more regular basis.
I think Michael just made me think of something. I don't think we've talked about it. If we did, excuse me, I missed it. But have you talked about the morale of the teachers with this whole boundary study? I don't know that we really covered that at all, as far as how they feel about things changing within their buildings.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And what I'm going to do is just kind of go back to those staff meetings and kind of the feedback, the questions and feedback that I got. Early in the process, I think community members were more concerned about the impact of the changes on their students and their children. And what we heard initially from staff was, what's the impact going to be on staffing? What are staffing assignments going to look like? What are section numbers going to look like? But within those first couple of, that was probably that first week, that second week, third week, I think we started to hear different questions and concerns, and certainly there was a concern about equity in terms of resources and students and the demographics at the schools. Concerns about different schools getting the resources they needed to support students. I think we're at a point where we've talked about it so much, I think there's an acceptance that this is the direction that the district needs to move. There are still, some folks, I think probably teachers, certainly families who are not happy about it. Many of them have been really respectful about it and understanding, I think Michael or Eric's point, this is long overdue. Had to be done. I just wish it didn't impact, my family. But, I think there was concern voiced, but I would say that the level of concern thankfully didn't get to the level that we saw the last 2 years from staff.
Yeah, I think the only conversations I've heard from staff in years previous, the ones that had talked to me about it, was more concerned the other way, that that our class sizes are too big. We've got other sites not being utilized as well. Why are we looking into this? I do appreciate the timing, because I think this is instrumental going into the budget cycle, especially when we look at some of those resources that we target, especially at the K through 5 level as far as interventionists, and how we allocate those to schools. So I think this is a good time to be looking at that and understanding what pieces we need to add or remove and how they need to be redeployed. So I appreciate that.
Any other questions? All right. Moving on, open discussion, issues, observations, and questions. So, do we need to vote? Boy, I just really. I'm trying to move too fast, yeah. All right, is there a motion to approve the redistricting plan as presented?
So, second.
Roll call.
DeVito,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Ren,
Yes.
Shiloh,
Yes.
Davy,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Trumbull. Motion carried.
Yeah. Now, open discussion, issues, observations, or questions.
I want to go back to the conversation we had earlier, related to the suspension report, maybe that change in behavior or attitudes, or this growing swell maybe of a more emotionally charged, environment, and just ask that we look at some plan, toward the end of this year, start of next year maybe, as far as what can we do, what should we be doing, should we be doing anything, but how are we addressing that, in the schools, either through the educational programs or the environment or anything else, that as opposed to just letting it take over.
So a really good point. And
I know it goes to those SEL conversations we've had for years.
yeah, so one of the things that you guys heard about earlier this year was the significant 72 that was implemented here at the middle school. So we had a recent conversation at an admin meeting about implementing that district-wide. That's something that we're going to be planning to do this spring for next fall. One of the other things that happened here at the middle school was that there was Sarah, we're here, John, I don't know, Jim, if you know the details, but there was a survey made available through the ROE that really kind of rated, trauma was the word, but kind of gauged SEL levels among staff. Is that right, Jim? So, although that doesn't apply to students, trends that we see in staff help us to kind of understand where students are. A lot of our staff have students in the school district. But that significant 72 is an effort to try to build those relationships with students. I think that's the key. I think research would tell you that that's the key in terms of student behavior and being able to de-escalate some of that behavior. One of the challenges I think moving forward is going to be some of the issues that we're dealing with as a society, and that's not just here in Sycamore. It's across our state. It's across our country. I think part of that's an outgrowth of COVID and just the brazenness of some of the behavior we saw from students, that we saw from adults. We saw those at public meetings. We saw those in public. That has a consequence. And we're going to continue to see that again, not just here. I think we're going to see that in schools everywhere. But things like that significant 72 implementing that district-wide is something that we hope helps build those relationships, make students feel more comfortable in schools, and puts our adults, our staff in a position where when behavior escalates, a relationship they have with the student maybe helps them to de-escalate that a little bit better. We'll always ask for parents' involvement and ask parents to partner with us A lot of times they do, you know, phone call home makes a huge difference, and mom and dad are on board, or mom or dad are on board. But we still have some situations where, despite pretty clear-cut behavior, you know, parents are still fighting on that. So the more we can work together, obviously, the better. But it's been a huge concern from the admin team, and something that we're gonna have to continue to look at moving forward for sure.
I think we can probably debate for quite a while on all the causes of this. And COVID is only one of them, you know, in my opinion. And I've seen it at collegiate level, experienced it at collegiate level with kids too. So it's not just K-12 schools either. They're modeling their parents' behavior, the behavior they see on CNN or Fox News or whatever source they're looking at, TikTok, whatever it might be. So I think there's really two questions wrapped into one there. One is, you know, how are we dealing with the here and now of consequence versus being restorative and trying to be more open about how we deal with the issues, but still having consequence, real consequence. And again, some parents support it, some just want to be their kid's best friend. That's one question. I think the other question that we probably should be looking at more so is how do we get to the root of the issues that are, you know, that are generating that. And I think there's a small percentage that are just kids smart enough to try and take advantage of the situation. But the vast majority are probably experiencing something. And, you know, how do we get to the root cause of that? You know, I'm finishing up one. I just read a couple of books. One's called Schools That Heal. It's all about the environment in and out of the school, physically in the space, that is supportive of lessening anxiety and lessening those less severe behaviors, but that escalate into larger behaviors. So I'd recommend that for one. Another one's called The Power of the Plant, which was written by, I think it's a New Jersey or New York teacher, and just bring natural biophilic stuff into the buildings. I would say that at least some of our buildings, a good chunk of our buildings, do have, you know, colors and things that are, it's not so sterile looking, but we could probably be doing more for not a lot of money. Something to think about. So those are just two that I've read recently and doing some research because we're looking at designing a new high school, and I'm like, I'll be darned if I'm designing a Cells and Bells high school. We're gonna make this a top-notch high school. You don't get to do a high school very often, right? Very seldom. So, but those are two that I found very interesting. Just the fact that the schools that heal, it's a little geared towards urban, you know, more urban settings, because they talk about LA larger school systems that have a wide variety of students, a wide variety of environments and socioeconomic involvement. But, you know, a school in LA has a different feel than a school in the Bronx. And it's not just looking at asphalt and sidewalks and parked cars versus green, and it's not even looking at a green field. It's actually looking at a tree. Believe it or not, there's a ton of research of just being able to physically see a tree. A classroom with a window, doesn't have the shades pulled, doesn't have the blinds pulled, or actually has a window. Because there are a lot of districts that I've been in, a bunch of them, that they don't even have the windows. And I know we have a handful of classrooms that fall into that category. It's what it is. But there are other ways to deal with it for, you know, not a lot of money. And it's not so different looking out at a big asphalt parking lot than it is looking at a cornfield, because there's still no trees. It's just a cornfield. It has the same kind of effect on students and staff. So it's a pretty good read, and I'm not saying we should go and, you know, blatantly adopt all of it, but I think there's some insights that, you know, we could tick off over the next 3 to 5 years that might be helping the root cause and take some of the lesser anxiety issues out of the picture, so we can focus on maybe the kids that really have more severe issues to deal with, and let the other ones kind of self-heal in the sense that we create the right environment. One of them talks about not overloading the students. And I've walked into so many classrooms that there isn't an inch of wall space anywhere, and it is kind of cool looking, whether it's, you know, first grade or fifth grade or whatever it might be, but it's overwhelming to the students. So, you know, targeting some of that stuff, putting stuff away and pulling it out when you need it, is one of the points they make as well. It's pretty interesting. But for what it's worth.
I think just dedicating one meeting a year to some sort of like state of the district, but board focused as opposed to community focused, where it's just, we're just kind of reporting on some of these CL trends, qualitative and quantitative data from the year. You know, if it's at the end of the year, here's what we observed. There's, you know, bring in looking at statistics of the suspension reports and, you know, some qualitative feedback from maybe surveys from the teachers and students, see how are people feeling, what are the issues, and then maybe, you know, getting you know, Mike Rice or somebody to come and present on, well, here's, in the educational field, here are some things that are going on in research to suggest changes we can make from a curricular or teaching practices base that might, you know, improve, just kind of make sure that that's part of our ongoing conversation. And maybe the sustainability committee needs to plant trees inside now. So,
Yeah.
Steve, do you know where these
To address the
physical
root cause.
Root cause,
are
like
happening?
my
They're not happening in the classroom, right? I assume they're happening in the hallway, or they're happening in the cafeteria or something.
By and large, my experience, and jump in if I miss it, there may be from time to time things happen in the classroom, but by and large, it's unstructured time. So it might be a locker room, but it's usually a hallway. It's usually when kids are outside of class, you know, lunchroom, those sorts of environments. Typically it's not a classroom. Would you guys agree with that? Yeah.
Well, and I'm building on that in the sense that I can't help but think there isn't a correlation between the absenteeism from teachers to the number of disciplinary infractions. And I think that on a lot of levels, you know, it's just, like I'm racking my brain going like, why, like you're talking about the societal issue, and you know, and I think immediately I think of phones, and I think of disengagement, and like the significant 72 piece is really interesting because it's all about, right, building relationships, put down the screen and like connect with the student, while at the same time you go, okay, well, you can't ban, like we already have a cell phone policy, you know, it's about as good as the paper it's written on, and you know, it does a whole lot, right, to have these infractions. We don't have the staff to enforce, so now the only other option is culture building, which is through that significant 72 program like we talked about. But then I'm also thinking, if there isn't, if it's all happening though in the lunchroom, if it's happening in the hallway, if it's happening in this unstructured time, what is there any other preventative means that can be put in beyond culture building to lend support? Because if you have 58% of staff now who are, where it used to be 98% of staff didn't have 10 or more absences, now 58% of staff have 10 or more absences, you've got subs, or hopefully subs, or building principals running around. So now in this common space, I assume you're pulling resources too. I'm just like, can we put more people in those common spaces? Can we literally just put bodies there? Would that help?
I think you hit on a really interesting point, and that is the more adults are around, first of all, just from a supervision standpoint, the better. But you know, taking a more cultural approach, the idea would be not only you just present, but you're interacting. I mean, you're talking, how was the game last night? Great job at the concert last night. You did awesome at the test last week. So I think that's a really interesting idea. At the same time, you know, we're still dealing with that staffing, you know, a shortage, and so adding more bodies, I think that there's a challenge there because we're still having trouble getting positions filled. But I think things like that significant 72, really pushing the culture, the relationship, I think that goes a long way. You know, I'm certainly not immune to behavior issues in my classroom, but I think years ago when I was in the classroom, I spent the first week, not 72, you know, not 3 days, the first week building relationships. What'd you do this summer? You know, tell us a little about yourself, and it just goes a long way, you know, towards being able to address behavior or just avoiding it, because kids develop that respect for who you are, and sometimes they choose not to misbehave because of the relationship they have with you. So I think really continuing to push that culture, that relationship piece will help. I'd love to get more bodies if we can find them. Yeah.
I think it reminds me during the principal interviews, we had one applicant that was talking about like disruptive lunchroom behavior and had turned it into like a DJ, and as long as all the kids were respectful, they got to kind of choose the music.
If you're volunteering to come in and spin. But let me know.
But those are the sorts of things, it does make you wonder, like, would music play during passing period, does that make a difference? And those sorts of things, I just would love for us to just spend a meeting once a year, just kind of bringing us up to speed on what's going on.
Yeah. I took some notes. I think it's a good idea.
Anybody else? Other topics? Future agenda items? I already talked about that.
That was, yeah. That's correct.
If not, I'll entertain a motion to go into executive session for the consideration of matters related to the appointment, employment, discipline, or dismissal of personnel or eminent litigation.
So moved. Second.
Roll call.
Jones,
Yes.
Lynn,
Yes.
Shiloh,
Yes.
Davey,
Yes.
DeVito,
Yes.
Nelson.
Yes.
Motion carried.
We'll take a 5-minute break and go into executive session. We're back in open session. Do I have a motion to approve the personnel report as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Shiloh,
Yes.
Davey,
Yeah.
DeVito,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Lynn,
Yes.
Nelson.
Yes.
Motion carried.
I have a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We're adjourned.